Hey, but we're going to come back with an interesting segment. We're going to talk about a little bit about religion when we come back with Craig Winn. So stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting segment. Then we're going to get back into the politics. 800-259-5791. Okay, welcome back to The Reality Check with Charles Butler. I'm here with a guy whom I have had an opportunity to spend some time with and talk to. He's a very interesting man. His name is Craig Winn. And for those of you who remember Craig, he had a radio show on Genesis Communication Network. Was nationally syndicated and talks about religion and the prophets and the books. And just talking to him for 10 or 15 minutes, if you're interested in that kind of thing, will certainly get your your interest up in pursuing religion. In fact, I'm going to go out and get this book that Craig has written called Prophet of Doom. But I want to bring Craig on. Hey, Craig, how are you this morning?
Hi, Charles. That's almost funny. Yeah, if you have an interest in religion, I will get your interest. That is for darn sure. You might be interested in trying to shoot me, but yeah, having dedicated the last 15 years to studying the Torah, prophets, and Psalms in the original language in Hebrew and translating them out of the oldest extant witnesses, which would be the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've gone from being very religious, I was an ordained ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church, to being overtly anti-religious as I've listened to what God had to say. So those of your listeners who are religious, they won't much like what we talk about this morning. But those who are agnostics, who are open-minded, and you said during our conversation you were a guest host on a show on another network, and you and I had the opportunity to talk, and you appear very open to learning and to considering new ideas, and so you have an aversion to it.
Well, no, I don't have an aversion to it. I don't think other people do either. I think that I was told once, when I talk about race, when I talk about politics, when I talk about history, I've had teachers, I've had professors, I've had college instructors tell me that I shape people's foundation because I tell the truth. I tell the truth. I'm sorry. Martin Luther King was not, his strategy was not a great strategy. Yeah, I'm sorry. He takes credit for things and they give him credit for things that he didn't have, any influence in. So anyway.
You want to talk about somebody that's interesting in terms of giving them credit for something that they were the opposite of? It's the caricature that we've created of Lincoln.
No question.
Lincoln in the Lincoln-Douglas debates was probably the most overt racist.
No question.
In the country. What he wanted to do, the reason he didn't want another state to be a slave state, is he wanted to create concentration camps and to treat the African Americans that had been brought into this country as slaves. He wanted them to be moved into concentration camps that were isolated in territories that weren't part of the Union, where they would be essentially dealt with like the Nazis
Indians
did the Jews.
Yeah,
and that was his position.
Yeah.
And so to present this great shrine to him as the great emancipator, it's just
he only emancipated
to fool the vast majority of people into believing things that aren't even remotely true about people.
Craig, he also, when you talk about the emancipation, let's I'm gonna put quote marks around emancipation.
Yeah. I said it tongue in cheek.
Yeah, he only emancipated slaves. He only emancipated slaves who were held in Confederate states. He didn't emancipate the slaves
over the Confederate states.
He didn't emancipate the slaves in the border states that fought with the Union. Okay,
I shouldn't be laughing because it's really sad.
Well, look at Georgetown. When we start talking about the Jesuits, and how accommodating the Jesuits were in Christianity and religion. Yeah. They had slaves. They made $32 million.
The Revolutionary War. You take Robert E. Lee, whose home was Arlington. It was confiscated by the North.
Yeah.
He was not a slave owner.
Right.
Robert E. Lee was not. But Ulysses S. Grant, who was the most successful general against him, he, of course, was a slave owner.
Mm-hmm.
did Lincoln think it would be a great idea that rather than allowing freedom to disassociate, because if you don't have freedom to disassociate, you do not have freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So why didn't he allow the states that wish to disassociate from the North to do so, as opposed to starting a war that would lead to the deaths of 650,000 people? And we celebrate that like he is this great national leader with a temple and shrine on the National Mall. It's really appalling.
Well, it's history, and when it's history, meaning his story, they can tell it any way they want. Okay.
They can, and they do. That's it's one of the things we talked a little bit about Islam. That happens to be one of my primary expertise. I've written a number of books. You mentioned Prophet of Doom. And by the way, for those who are listening who want to understand Islam, I'm not trying to sell anything. Prophet of Doom is available in its entirety, free online. And so if you just go to prophetofdoom.net, you can read the whole thing. You don't have to buy it. But it is interesting that there is this myth that Islam is somehow a tolerant religion when in Islam's first 100 years, Muslims wiped out half of the planet's population. Now, the reason we don't read about it is because the conquerors, the Muslims, were illiterate, and the people they killed had a real tough time writing their story when they were dead. But half of the world's population in the first 100 years of Islam's creation were wiped out by the.
Well, we're talking 800 A.D. And this is the thing that tickles me. Every time I hear this phrase, I just start giggling like a little girl, because they say, well, Islam is a religion of peace. Where?
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 Oh, gosh. And first of all, Islam in Arabic is the Arabic word for submission. So it is the religion of submission. And its submission, they will extrapolate it to the will of Allah. Well, the problem is, if you read the Quran and set it in the context of Muhammad's life, Allah is modeled exactly after Hasatan, the adversary, in the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. He spends all of his time in hell torturing people. He is a terrorist. I mean, Allah, there is no correlation whatsoever between Allah, the God of Islam, and Yahowah, the God who created the universe and inspired the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. None. And so, they'll make all sorts of wild claims, but the fact of the matter is, Allah was modeled after Satan. That's why when every time a terrorist commits
wait a minute. Let's go. I want people to hear that. Because you kind of went over it real quick. You said Allah is modeled after Satan. Okay.
Now, by the way, that's not my opinion.
Okay.
It's an undeniable, irrefutable conclusion, and it's the only conclusion that can be drawn if you actually read the Quran. Allah spends all of his time in hell. All of it. I mean, in the Quran, he is only depicted in hell. And in hell, he is
why can't we have
unbelievably gruesome and excruciating tortures on everyone who does not submit to him. And the very fact that Islam means submission is the antithesis of Yahowah. Yahowah is all about free will. In fact, there's not even a Hebrew word for obey. There's even a Hebrew word for obey, and from Yahweh's point of view, the term Lord doesn't apply to him. It applies to Satan, because Yahowah has no interest in people submitting to him, which is the basis of Islam. I was just going to say, though, Charles, is that when a Muslim commits an act of terrorism, and by the way, if you do not commit acts of terrorism as a Muslim, according to the 9th surah of the Quran, you cease to be a Muslim and you become a hypocrite. So according to the Quran, there's no such thing as a moderate Muslim.
As I said before.
They all scream, Allahu Akbar.
Yeah.
And Allahu Akbar means Allah is greater. It means he is older, he is bigger, and he is greater.
Now, listen.
Now, greater than who? Older than who? Bigger than whom?
Listen.
To find that out, you have to look at the first time it was used, which was in the raid of Kabar, where Muhammad wanted to taunt the Jews who he had exiled there after robbing them in Medina, Yathrib at the time, and he wanted to harass them, mock them, before he murdered all the men, raped the women, and plundered them. So he said, scream Allahu Akbar. It's the first time the phrase was used. and it means that Allah is greater than Yahowah. It's Satan's wish list.
I want to tell people this because they may not know this, but you spent a great deal of time in the Middle East interviewing Al-Qaeda. ISIS, I guess, hadn't been created yet. We hadn't. Hillary and Barack hadn't created ISIS.
Yeah, it's funny, but no, they didn't. It's actually George Bush and Petraeus that created ISIS, but we can talk about that at another time.
Yeah, we can. That'll be interesting. Yep. But so here we have ISIS. But anyway, you spent time over there.
Yeah, they did not exist, and at the time, well, Al-Qaeda was being presented as the great boogeyman because of their alleged role in 9/11. When I met with Al-Qaeda, it just became instantly obvious. This was right after 9/11, and when I met with them, it was instantly obvious. Two things. One is that the Giuliani line that the terrorists haven't. The terrorists have corrupted their religion. I think his line was they have hijacked their religion. The fact of the matter is that the fundamentalists, the Al-Qaeda types at the time, were the best Muslims. They were fundamentalists. They were the best Muslims. They hadn't corrupted their religion at all. The religion had corrupted them. And that became obvious from my meeting with Al-Qaeda. I asked them why they were killing us, and they quoted Muhammad from the Hadiths, which are all reports from Muhammad and his companions, and the Quran. And based upon those things, they justified their killing of us. And so I came back and I tried to verify whether or not they had cherry-picked a few dastardly verses out of a sea of moral grace, and what I found is that well, the Quran is about 99% immoral, and that it is unabashedly deadly and vicious. And what they were citing is not just in the Quran and Hadith; it's the dominant theme of the Quran and Hadith. So it didn't take very long to determine for absolute certain that every American politician, most in the media, and most in our military are lying about the nature of Islam.
Well, the question is when we come back, we'll deal with the question. But for me, the question is, it's just like Benghazi. Why are they lying? Okay? We'll come back with Craig Winn. We'll talk about that. And if you have any questions, just call us at 800-259-5791. 800-259-5791. Hey, welcome back to the Reality Check with Charles Butler. I'm here with Mr. Craig Winn, and Craig, I want to ask you. We were talking about the facts here, and you guys were, I know you had gone to the Middle East and interviewed various Muslims and gotten their
reasons for thinking it was appropriate to terrorize and kill innocent people.
And when we took out Saddam Hussein, when we went to that region, there was a reason that George Herbert Walker Bush stopped doing what he did. And he tried to explain to the American people and to the world that these people weren't living in 1995. They were living in 700 AD. And I try to emphasize that to people, and they call me Islamophobe and all kinds of craziness. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. These people are slaughtering goats in a bathtub in their homes, and sheep in a bathtub in their homes, and they come here.
Far worse than that. They're raping them. But bestiality is extraordinarily common amongst Muslims. In fact, the Ayatollah Khomeini, in his little green book, dedicated an entire chapter, some 20 pages, into the proper ways to have sex with a goat.
Yeah.
This is a really, really disturbed religion. I mean, there's a reason that you look at the 55 Islamic countries and their hellholes. There's a reason that millions of people are trying to flee the countries like Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, and Syria. There's a reason behind these things, and we don't seem to want to deal with it. Now, as it relates to George Bush and his and King George the First and King George the Second, they both invaded Iraq on false pretenses. It's kind of the American tradition is to engage in wars based on lies, and then to make it sound like it's one's patriotic duty to continue to fight. But the fact of the matter is that we made Iraq infinitely worse than it was before we found it. We made Vietnam worse than we found it. We made Afghanistan worse than we found it. We made Libya worse than we found it. We made Yemen worse than we found it. Our military interventionism in foreign countries has been counterproductive now for a long time, and we continue to make the same mistake over and over again.
But it's not a mistake. It's on purpose. You don't make big mistakes like that.
Yeah, that's true. There is no way that a country that sacrificed 55,000 American lives to make Vietnam worse than we found it could have invaded Afghanistan expecting a different result, or then invaded Iraq expecting a different result, or then bombed Libya into submission expecting a different result. So you're correct. It can't be a mistake. It's deliberate.
No question. And you look at Gaddafi. Here's a guy who does everything that the West demands of it. He did everything that the U.S. demanded of it, even when the U.S., in my opinion, lied about Gaddafi bombing this black club in Germany. And I'm going, wait a minute. There are a bunch of hillbilly clubs up and down this street, but the Libyan, who's a black man, goes into a black nightclub and sets off a bomb. Something's wrong with that. And kills a soldier. Something's wrong with that picture. I'm sorry. Knowing Gaddafi,
Gaddafi, like Saddam Hussein, both bad guys. I mean, Gaddafi was a very disgusting syphilitic that had all sorts of serious mental issues. But the fact is that while he was dictator over Libya, Libya was a reasonable place to live. Now that we have bombed him out of existence, Libya is probably the single worst country on the planet to live, because the only power, once the dictator was gone, were Islamic fundamentalist organizations, and now they're just a series of not only terrorists, but those terrorists are being armed by the United States and by Qatar, and they have become the primary terrorist merchants for weapons throughout Africa, which has destabilized that whole area, and also throughout the Middle East. So we made a bad situation infinitely worse. We were going to ask, you to explain and to hear the music, why Obama and Clinton lied about Benghazi. Hopefully we'll have a chance to do that.
We'll do that. Maybe we'll do it next week.
Okay, be my pleasure.
All right, thanks, Greg. Appreciate you.
Sure.
All right. So welcome back to Charles Butler Show and the reality check with Charles Butler. We've been talking about religion for the last few minutes, and I tell you, when you talk to or listen to Craig Winn, who spent 15 years over in the Middle East interviewing people and reading the Quran and interpreting the Torah, man, kind of gives you goosebumps. But like I said, when you look at history and you look at Lincoln, who was an ardent racist, or Kennedy, another racist, or Johnson, another racist, and you look at people like Dwight David Eisenhower, who's never given credit for what he did in civil rights, or Richard Nixon, or Ronald Reagan, or even the Bushes, Daddy or Baby Bush. History. I mean, it's just the deceit and the miseducation of Americans.